Hi, so I have Lee and Whitney here today, and they work together. Lee owns a consulting business, and Whitney is an employee in the business. And they know their Kolbes really well, and they're going to tell us their patterns and how it has helped their working relationship. So Lee, why
Thank
don't you
you.
start? Yeah.
Okay, sure thing, Susan. So I tend to initiate action with a whole lot of need for process and structure. It's not something I can help. It's about getting things in order, seeing the big picture, understanding what all the pieces are and what all the steps are. That's sort of my superpower. From the point of view of data and information, I tend to go for the relevant information, but get worn out if I need to really go into too much depth. In terms of risk, I'm a little on the cautious side. I'm not on the front line. I'm a fast follower, but I really like to kind of get a sense of what it's going to take to make something happen before I engage. And I work almost entirely in terms of my imagination and intellect rather than hands-on. If it's something that needs to be demonstrated or fixed, you don't want to come to me.
You're not the guy.
Yeah, I'm going to call somebody to have it done. Right.
Get the expert.
And Whitney, how would you describe your patterns? Then we'll talk about how that influences how the two of you work together.
Yeah. So while Lee is thinking about the sort of systemic view of things, I'm actually digging into the details. So my instinct is to understand the who, what, when, where, why. I don't know if there are other W questions we could throw in there, but I'm constantly asking for a little more detail here, or maybe sharing a little more detail that I think is really important or helps me to feel grounded in the work we're doing. So I always start with, what are the facts? As Lee said around this idea of experimentation or taking risk, that's actually my sort of co-action, my sister superpower with my fact finding. My real instinct with taking risk is to experiment, to try it on a small scale. I'm not going to just do everything all at once, but I think about using the data and the details we have to then think about, well, where are we going? What are we doing? How can we push the boundaries safely a little bit? When it comes to things like process and planning, I do have an appetite for it. So Lee and I can at least hear each other's language a little bit there, but I don't have nearly the systems thinking that Lee's coming with. My way of handling process and orientation, or excuse me, process and organization is to really make sure that what's working keeps working really, really well. And then, as Lee said, our business is not particularly concrete or physical in nature. We work with people, we work with systems, and being able to conceptualize our work is much more important than being able to build something physically or move something in a more hands-on fashion. So that is how I get things done.
That's great, Whitney. So what would you both say about how has this helped you be more productive when you're working together, knowing that you have very different ways of operating?
Well, I tend to be the one to create the plans or the designs or the timelines. I have a pretty innately accurate sense of how long things take and just how the pieces will fit together. So that's almost by default kind of a primary role for me. What it also does is prompt me to be the one to do a lot of proofreading and editing, just to be sure that all the pieces are there.
Yeah.
As Whitney shared, she's got that organizational drive, but I do have just somehow I will spot what's missing, and I actually don't think that's that data strength as much as the pattern recognition and the follow-through strength.
Mhm. Yeah, for me, I think what I notice is that it makes our handoffs really smooth, if that makes sense. Like, I don't try to do something that works against my grain. What I do is go to my colleague, Lee, who can create that design from scratch. Something that might take me 4 hours to do, he can do in one. And so we have a little bit more of a sense of what are the things we need to hand off to one another. As much as we collaborate as a team, we don't all have to be present for every step of our projects.
Right.
You're really leveraging each other's strengths.
100%, 100%. And I don't know, it's not all about just our expertise or our education. It is how we work together. It is what our natural instinct is around how to solve the problems.
So let me ask you a question that I did not prepare you for. Has Kolbe helped you where you might get on each other's nerves and you understand, oh, that's how Whitney is doing that differently? Can you give us an example that we'll just finish up with that? Like, how have you stepped back and won, oh, I got to give Lee that space, or I got to give Whitney that time?
Yeah, I've got a really good example right off the top, which is our difference in our fact finder. So again, my instinct is to ask a lot of questions, dig into a lot of detail, but I also share a lot of detail. I may say the same thing 3 times in different ways because to me, there's a slight difference in how I've said it each time. It may sound the same to Lee. And so I think Kolbe gives me it gives us a little bit of a personal buffer where Lee might say, you know, my fact finder is getting a little tired of this particular conversation. I think we've really got it here.
Just bottom line that.
Just bottom line it for me. And like, you just beautifully done, Lee, because that's exactly how it is. And I know that it's not that Lee, you know, thinks what I'm saying is unimportant, or he just wants me to shut up or whatever. I know that it has nothing to do with that. It's simply
that just doesn't need as much information as you're ready to share.
Exactly.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And so then our feelings don't get hurt. Right?
Absolutely.
You know, there's another example that's interesting, Susan, because some of this is our cognitive strength or energy, and part of it's cognitive. So I will review a lot of Whitney's work, whether it's a proposal or a client report or a presentation that she's doing. And it occurred to me that she might be expecting me to do some of that work. Like maybe she's not bringing it to completion before I review it, right? And so because of our difference and that she does rely on me to kind of fill in the pieces. So we had a very frank conversation and said, Whitney, sometimes it feels like you're bringing me unfinished work. And I really have an expectation that you will, take it to 100% before I look at it. And it was it was a very good conversation, I thought, but it was like a suspicion on my part that, you know what, maybe this leveraging each other's strengths is going a little too far here.
That's really interesting, right?
Well,
And go ahead.
What I would just share about that too is, again, the conversation, moving it away from our more personality-based issues of like, you're not caring enough about the work, right? Lee could have made that kind of assumption that might have been why my work seemed a bit subpar at times. But being able to recognize like, oh, there might also be this cognitive piece on top of that. There may be something that there's an expectation here, as opposed to Whitney doesn't care or Whitney's not doing a good job. And I will say, interestingly enough, even after that conversation, I will still bring him things. He's still going to proofread even after I've proofread. He's still going to do it.
Yeah.
He's still going to do it.
And that's okay. I get a lot of self-satisfaction from that.
Absolutely.
You know what I love about what you guys are saying? What I love about what you're saying is it's not personal. You figured out how to be very smart about how to maybe leverage, sometimes over leverage, but how to talk about how your differences make your working relationship work. That's so great. All right. Thank you so much for your time today.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Susan.